So this is an interesting question for me because it's not something that was obvious at the time. It was something that I needed to really think about and go deeper into myself. And I kind of think about this in a way of that you don't know if something's missing until something bad happens. And for me, that was going through suicidal depression. Here I was, I was young. So a young white male in America, we already know how that has its benefits. I had been recruited to take over a company. So I was second in charge of a multi-million-dollar company. I was working in a career that I had a long tenure in, that I was very good at. I was making a lot of money. I was living in New York City. I had my own apartment. I had a car. I had a family that loved me. I had money in the bank. I had a title. I had all these amazing things. And for whatever reason, I was not happy. And it made no sense to me. Because here's a person who, if you looked at my resume, or if you looked at who I was from the outside even, I was still happy. I was still traveling the world. I was still doing everything I want. There was no reason for me to not be happy. There was no reason for me to be doubting myself. There was no reason for me to not be fulfilled. There was no reason for me to ultimately fall into depression, and there was definitely no reason for me to want to end my life. And so when we look at this, in the moment, it made no sense. And now with the benefit of hindsight, I'm actually able to look back and understand the reason why I felt that way is because I was so out of line with my purpose of what I was really supposed to do, what I was put on this earth to do. And the reason why I knew that was because of my travels. I had quit my original, I was a consultant previously, and I had quit that job, again, at what I thought was the peak of my career. And it turns out I was right to quit it. I wasn't satisfied anymore. I wasn't fulfilled anymore. It wasn't something I wanted to wake up for. And Steve Jobs has a famous quote, is if you wake up, for a week in a row, look at yourself in the mirror, and you don't want to do what you do, you really need to be questioning what you were doing. And so for me, I realized, I was like, this is not for me. This career is not for me anymore. This job isn't for me anymore. Where I was living in Dallas, Texas wasn't for me. So I quit. And the plan was to take a 1-year sabbatical, live in the mountains, because I've always wanted to do that, and then travel the world, volunteering around the world along the way. And so that was 1 year turned into 2. I went back to the mountains, and I actually traveled the world again for another year, and then 2 years turned to 3, where I ended up living in Australia. And so that brought me immense joy, but again, I was out of my purpose. I was bartending while I was trying to get a nonprofit started off the ground, which would have actually been the genesis. Well, actually, in hindsight, it was the genesis of the first iteration of what was formerly known as Cliffhanger Academy, which is now known as PSYFI. And so when that didn't work out, I was kind of forced to come back to the US for visa reasons. And then that is what kind of propelled me into my current job. And I think having the knowledge of going around the world and realizing that there's so much suffering out there, there's so much pain out there, and that I need to serve a higher purpose. I need to be doing more than just making money and just making myself and other people rich. When I realized that, I don't think it really settled into my soul or my heart at that point, because when I took this other job, I was just chasing the money again. And then about 1.5 years into it is when I started having a lot of doubts and crippling, it was almost crippling depression. Like I was getting sick every 3 weeks, like bedridden. There would be times where I could barely go through an hour without feeling like my chest was gonna collapse, and just all this pressure on my chest and all these just unhelpful thoughts about this, that my life was never gonna get better and something wrong with it. Where again, it's weird because there was nothing wrong with my life. If you looked at my life from an outside perspective, I had everything together. I had everything that someone would want. I had, like I said, the title, the family, the money, the job, the place, doing everything that I wanted to do. And I wrote my own kind of bill for the current company I was at. So that's the one thing I think that really inspired me to create PSYFI as well, because I know there's a lot of people out there that are being driven by productivity and not purpose. And for me, I had been just productivity. My self-worth was tied to how much I made, what my bank account said, what my title was, who I was influencing, what kind of car I drove, what kind of apartment I had, who I was dating, all this kind of stuff, instead of being driven by a purpose, which is now why I feel so strongly about PSYFI and why we're growing this company to serve 10 million people.